Oh no, I gotta just find.
Oh, you're recording?
It is
Yeah.
getting.
I'm kidding.
We posted on the website.
Okay, that's all right. Okay, then I'll know not to stumble and fall. And
No, no, no. And
Monitor recording.
welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We're honored that you are here. It is Tuesday. Happy Tuesday, January 16th. You are joining us. So this session is with Innovate BC in collaboration, partnership with Can Do. So we're happy that you're here. I hope you're all doing well. I can't speak well because I'm still recovering from our ice cold weather on the weekend. So my name is Michelle Tanse. I'm joining from Amisquachi-Waskagan, Edmonton Treaty 6 territory. We probably made the news because it was cold here. I don't know where you're from. Feel free to put that in the chat box. But it's been a very cold couple of days here in Edmonton anyways. But I woke up this morning, checked the weather, talked to Creator, and it was a minus 15. So I feel like we can handle this weather here. So I hope wherever you are, you're staying warm. I hope you are well and safe in your home fire. We got a minus 19 in Ontario. Not bad. Not bad. We were hitting the minus 30, minus 40 weather on the weekends. So not that it's a competition, Ken, but just letting you know. So welcome. January 15th is notorious for being the Blue Monday. Coming off of holiday season where people are perhaps spending money on gifts and maybe trips, and then that bill comes in the mail. So, finances can be pretty tough around this time, but also in the dead of winter, feeling that low energy. So I just want to encourage you all just to remember to take care of you, to practice good self-care, take care of you, tap into community. Maybe it's ceremony, maybe you need to listen, go on YouTube. If you've been cold like me all weekend, we have that resource on YouTube where we have really good knowledge keepers and elders who lend their stories, because winter really is about listening to the stories, and also being like that bear, hibernating and resting and taking care of ourselves. So I hope you're able to find moments like that. And also, may I encourage you to hydrate. I know when we're in this dead of winter cold, we want that hot chocolate, those lattes, the teas to keep us warm, but really also remember to hydrate and drink. Well, I always say, water is Creator's best medicine, best gift that's been given to us. So just want to acknowledge where we are in our world, in the season, that some of us may be struggling, but remember, we're never alone in Creator's world. There's so many resources. So reach out, tap into those good resources that are all around us. There's medicine all around us, but sometimes it requires us to reach out, to step out, to call out and ask for help. And in that is strong and courageous. All right, so let's get on with today's program, shall we? We have a great guest speaker. I believe, did I hear, Glenn, you're joining us from Winnipeg?
I am joining you from Treaty 1 territory. I am in the dead center, the logistical center of Canada.
Oh.
From the confluences of the Red and the Assiniboine, which is a former major trade route all across Canada. So welcome. Thank you very much for that, Michelle. I can honestly say that for the first time in a very long time, during January, Winnipeg in Treaty 1 territory was not marked as the coldest place on the planet this year. And I think that is now Edmonton. So thank you very much for taking that from us. I appreciate it. Michelle, thank you for that wonderful introduction and the preface for today's conversation. Although it's cold outside, I'm hoping that I can warm you up with this conversation around governance and ECDEV environment. Sorry, I refer to as ECDEV. The actual technical for business development is economic development. This presentation was first introduced at Can Do's National Conference on Member 2 First Nation in June done through workshop. I've had the privilege and the honor of being asked by CanDo to present this one to all of you here today. So under that note, Michelle, I'm just going to get underway if that's okay. Okay, I'm trying to be mindful of the time. I know that we have an hour together today, so we're going to go through this at the pace that all of you would like to. I prefer that any questions that you have are asked at the end. If we can hold our questions until the end, that'd be great. If you have something that's pressing, please feel free to throw it up in either the chat box or put your hand in the air. But having said that, we're just going to get underway. Again, if that's okay with everybody, hopefully I'm going to become a little, see all the conversations. So just give me a second. So everybody who can see my screen now. Are we good? We are, perfect.
Good to go.
Okay, so the title of this one is called Governance and Economic Development. My name is Glenn Fleetwood. I am a senior manager working with BDO Canada LLP. So a little bit about our firm. We are a national accounting advisory, tax and consulting firm that works from coast to coast to coast all through Canada. I specifically, my business unit, my service line is called Financial Reporting and Insights. However, I work exclusively with First Nation communities and economic development operations across Canada. So I just wanted to throw that out there. We've jigged this one a little bit for the Innovate BC webinar series. So we're just going to get underway. So as customary and according to BDO's ESG policies, it is incumbent upon all of us that present that we provide in land acknowledgement. So I'm doing the acknowledgement today from Treaty 1, which is where I'm sitting and I'm resident. So BDO Canada acknowledges our firm is located on the ancestral lands of the Dakota, the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji Cree, the Dene, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. BDO acknowledges that we sit on Treaty 1 territory, and we acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We further acknowledge the fact that together we are all treaty people. So this is me. My name is Glenn Fleetwood. I am a chartered professional accountant. I'm what's considered to be a legacy certified general accountant. For those of you that are all old enough to remember that designation, I have over 30 years of professional experience. I have 14 years post-designation experience. I have 11 years serving Indigenous communities and organizations. I'm now going on year number 12. For 7 years, I worked as either the Director of Finance, the Chief Financial Officer, and the Chief Operating Officer of Peguis First Nation, which for some of you who do know is Manitoba's largest First Nation community. I am a member of the following professional associations. I'm a member of CanDo. I'm a member of AFOA Canada and a member of AFOA Manitoba. I'm a member of the Institute of Public Administrators or Public Administration of Canada. And I'm both a member of CPA Manitoba and CPA Saskatchewan. I'm an accountant by training and I'm an accountant by profession. I no longer work as an accountant. I now work as a management consultant, as I said. And furthermore, I am certified by CPA Canada as advanced preparer and user of public sector financial statements. So what that really means is if I wanted to, I can prep the books for the Government of Canada, as well as all 643 First Nation communities across Canada. However, I choose not to do that. I leave that work for other people. So today's presentation is going to be based on the following quote, which was provided to me with permission from Chief Donny Smoke, who is the hereditary chief of Dakota Plains First Nation, which is located on unceded Dakota territory in what is now present-day Manitoba. And his quote goes on with this: good governance and accountability are the keys to prosperity. He lives this comment every single day. So basically, Chief Smoke is a hereditary chief, as we acknowledge by the membership of his community, as chief upon the passing of his late father, Orville Smoke. Soon after his time as chief began, Chief Smoke recognized quickly that in order to successfully move forward, one must do so knowing there are many stakeholders, players, and unscrupulous people at the door and in the community. In today's presentation, he wanted me to emphasize the last part of that comment about unscrupulous people at the door and in the community. He says this because good governance and good decision-making will rid everybody of these unscrupulous people, and it'll put in place decision-making that is effective, accurate, and timely. To ensure the continued prosperity of his community, there would need to be levels of governance and accountability not only with himself as chief and a hereditary chief, but also with the staff and management as well as the whole community. He felt that that was important because none of that existed prior to him becoming chief. To that end, a little bit about the Wahpeton Nation. Their economic development journey is just beginning. They're working with us to build their strategy out right now. So here we go, where we're looking with governance and accounts. So these are the 5 key areas or 4 key areas that we're going to go through today. We're going to talk about what some underlying keys to success and prosperity are. We're going to talk about what governance actually really truly is. We're going to talk a little bit about sustainability and prosperity and how they can all work together to lead towards sustainability and prosperity. And we're going to the final topic of conversation today is we're going to introduce the idea of corporate trusts. What are they and how they contribute to a solid and strong governance framework in an ECDEV environment. And then we're going to follow it up with questions and answers. So good governance is a necessity for any successful organization, for-profit, not-for-profit, or public sector alike. Doesn't matter. Good governance provides oversight. So this would be a role in a business environment of a board of directors, for example, or a board of trustees. Good governance provides responsibility for decision-making. It builds accountability and sustainability, drives culture, and ensures alignment with corporate values. So basically, good governance is not just about, or does it not just focus on profitability. It should be seen as an important tool in the successful management and delivery of outcomes and strategies in any organization. Good governance sets the tone at the top and the culture that exists in the organization. That's key, because tone at the top or culture permeates any organization. It leads to sustainability, it leads to prosperity, it leads to a whole lot of wonderful things, including staff retention. Leadership does this by ensuring values permeate the organization, as we just talked about. Which values are reflected are often those of the governance body and senior management working together. Good governance opens environments where we all know and understand, where people that work in those environments all know and understand their roles and responsibilities, their expectations under policy, and they also know they are working in a safe and healthy environment, which good governance can and does provide, and will generally thrive and work diligently on the movement and completion of goals and tasks. The important thing that governance can do to breeding a healthy work environment is, for the most part, if the culture, the tone of the top are implemented and they do permeate the workplace, it will do away with, or it will address lateral violence that exists in a workplace, and it will do it very quickly. Alignment of values in an organization be thought of as identifying a mission, vision, and guiding principles, or a statement of values. Outlining values as part of the planning process, incorporating them into an approved strategic plan that is then implemented, and sharing the value statement of the organization along with the mission and the vision statements, and then living them daily will provide leadership and set expectations about attitudes in the environment, teamwork, the importance of teamwork, and how all will be treated daily while in the work environment. It builds confidence, morale, and safe environments, which can lead to more positive outcomes, increased productivity, better organizational alignment, and better outcomes. So again, this is the overarching theme of today's presentation, about what good governance can lend itself to and bring about. So now we're looking at governance, which is the process of making and implementing decisions within an organization. The way rules, norms, and actions are structured, sustained, regulated, and introduced. It's a governance body that usually takes a traditional form of a board of directors, for example. However, in recent years, less traditional approaches to governance can be taken and can work. When we talk about less traditional or more rigid governance frameworks, we talk about flat governance structures. In other words, there's one person at the top, but everybody are peers in the organization. They all work together to achieve a common goal, and there's no hierarchy or vertical hierarchy in place that would potentially see layers of management, such as a chief executive officer, a chief operating officer, a CFO, different levels of management, programming management. Instead, you just have a horizontal line with one individual at the top that reports into the board of directors or the board of trustees, or ultimately those individuals that assume overall responsibility for the management and the operations of your organization. Other forms of less traditional governance models can be based on group decision-making, in which decisions are made and move forward based on a consensus as opposed to the quorum of governance body. So Unanimous decision-making would be indicative of a more social-based governance model. Governance is also as much about decisions, as much about how decisions are made, as it about who makes the decisions, and that's also key as well. The implementation and execution of decision-making comes in the form of application of policy. Policy is the responsibility of the governance body or your organization, and it's no one else. And what we mean by that, your governance body owns policy, and they're the only ones that can own policy. They are the ones that are responsible for approving it, bringing it into existence, managing it, asking for it to be implemented. And then once they ask for it to be implemented, it becomes management's responsibility to do the implementation and enforce the policy. So in line with that, because it would pose a conflict of interest based on this model that we're talking about today, a traditional governance body does not, nor should it, manage operations. If it does, it will be in a conflict of interest, as we talked about, and they'll be assuming management's role and responsibility. So properly structured governance framework will be rigid enough to be predictable and flexible enough to respond to changes in key issues or key dimensions of governance and decision-making. For example, as we just come out of the pandemic across the country, COVID-19 has impacted the way in which governance meetings are held and action items or takeaways are delivered or communicated to its members, ex officio members included. Virtual meetings have allowed meetings to take place and to be digitally recorded, forming a book of record and the minutes for that meeting. These recorded minutes or these recorded video conversations can then be subsequently added to chat rooms, emailed to participants, or transcribed for the participants. Meetings, especially governance body meetings, no longer require being in attendance in the traditional sense. For example, I sit on 2 boards here locally in Treaty 1 territory. They're both not-for-profit boards, and I cannot remember for the life of me the last time we gathered as a group at a table. It has been at least 3 years since that has happened, and based on that time frame, most of the original board members that I sat on with one in particular, their terms have expired. Already their original terms have expired. So again, it's key to understand that traditional frameworks and traditional ways of making decisions, in other words, meeting and congregating, gathering at a table, are a thing of the past. Everybody's moving to virtual meetings. They can be conducted more efficiently, and they can allow participants to gather from wherever they happen to be. If they're traveling for work, for example, or like all of you, you're dispersed across Canada. Virtual meetings can be the norm, providing meeting rules are followed. And it's key that once a governance body adopts a set of meeting rules, such as Robert's rules, that those meeting rules are followed even in a virtual meeting. So what we mean by that is votes are called for, hands are put in the air, yeses or nos are recorded, things of that nature. In other words, motions can be made, they can be seconded on. In other words, the governance model and the governance policy has to hold regardless of where you're meeting. So a governance body generally assumes overall responsibility for the outcomes of an organization, including its operations. Recent trends see renewal of these bodies being done using formal recruitment strategies. In other words, they're collecting CVs or resumes. They're performing interviews and screening candidates while looking for the right fit and ensuring candidates meet eligibility criteria, such as for the member of a finance and audit committee or a member of a board or committee for an economic development opportunity or an economic development corporation supporting a First Nation. Many of them are now starting to look for CPAs, CFMs, or CAPAs for some non-traditional accounting designations that exist in the First Nation space to ensure that they have eligible and they have the right members on their boards. Governance bodies have the responsibility to make policy and therefore set the guidelines and steps to decision-making, including establishing the rules of engagement and hiring practices for the organization they assume responsibility for. Generally, there is one employee the governance body manages and hires, and that is generally, according to our framework that we're talking about today, the CEO or the chief executive officer or the band operator or the general manager or whatever the most senior official in that organization's title happens to be. That individual is hired as their senior manager, and that senior manager will implement the goals, decisions, and values of the board of directors into their operations and then manage the operations toward the desired outcomes as determined by the board of directors. As we've indicated before, and we talked about a little bit before, governance bodies are not operational managers, are not responsible for managing the organization. They are responsible for governance and oversight only. Management is responsible for management. If you have one takeaway from today's presentation, I'd like you to take that away from today's meeting. That management is hired to manage, boards are appointed to provide oversight. So, and the reason that exists is boards manage operations. They're possibly in a conflict of interest, which would mean potentially that any decisions they may enter into could be rendered null and void, including any action items that come from those decisions. So it's important that we think about this on a daily basis. Am I in a conflict of interest? Right? And it's important that boards, just to follow up on my thought, it's important that boards work together along with their management to mitigate as much as possible potential conflicts of interest that exist in the environment. So there's basically 4 key dimensions to governance. Moving from the right side to the left side in a circular fashion, or as circular fashion as we can be based on this slide. Leadership can be defined as behavior necessary to align collective direction and renew organizations, which enables behavior and attitudes that leads to desired and positive outcomes. So that is a non-traditional definition of leadership. That is a definition of leadership that can determine, and I give the idea that leadership can come from within. It doesn't necessarily have to be folks that have been appointed or individuals that have been appointed to senior management positions that are ultimately, according to organizational charts, responsible for leading according to the org charts and job descriptions. This speaks to the fact that leadership can come very much from within. It is to push the group from behind philosophy, moving them forward. Right? As a senior manager, as a former chief financial officer for a very large First Nation, I was a firm believer in teamwork. And when I used to get the staff together to meet and set projects and priorities, just because I was the CFO and my entire team knew this doesn't mean that I was the one that was responsible. I was the one that was the leader. The one that was the leader was the one that would be identified to be able to move the progress forward. And many times when we had doing things like data entry or setting up charts of accounts, for example, the junior staff, what we would call the junior staff, or the clerks or the data entry clerks, would be the ones that were leading that project because they're the best ones to do it. So in other words, leadership is not something that happens at the top. It's something that happens and comes from within. So decision-making responsibility from that perspective is delegated to individuals, or in the case of government or governance, groups of people that are responsible for making decisions, holding individuals accountable for actions, behaviors, and outcomes, which is why we can say that leadership or governance can come from within as well as coming from those people that are at the top. For example, a board of directors hires a CEO who is then responsible for the management of the organization, including expected outcomes and behaviors. That's the chart, right? So this board of directors has hired, in this case, a specific CEO that they've charged to do this. Now, think about this, for example, if a CEO is a chief executive officer of a large organization like Can-Do, for example, can that one individual do the entire job on their own of managing that operation on a daily basis? So delegation is the way that most senior managers go about delegating down or getting the responsibilities of their office accomplished. And they do this basically through following responsibility levels, such as, and for an example, positional signing authority. So in other words, program managers or managers of program or directors of departments may have signing authority over expenses or expenditures, may be responsible for implementing policy, may be responsible for making decisions up to certain thresholds according to delegation charts or appointed levels from the board of directors. Delegation of responsibility is key to successful governance strategies. No one individual or group of people can do it all, as we talked about. Key roles with associated responsibility levels are subject matter experts that are employed or which volunteer their time should always take over. So in other words, as a chief executive officer, and for those of you that are in the crowd today that have decision-making authority in your roles or in your job level responsibilities, how many of you are making the decisions on your own without the input from others? So that's a takeaway, but if any of you want to toss your hands in the air using the raise hand function in Zoom, that's cool as well. Decision-making is important as it lends itself to point number 3 on this, which is who is accountable for and responsible for decision-making. Decision-making is important because it's also a blended approach to setting, following, or abandoning a course of action. Someone who has influence and responsibility must determine a course of action to take. Knowing who is responsible for determining a course of action, or steering the ship, as it were, provides all involved with the knowledge needed to understand implicitly roles and responsibilities. And at the end of the day, who is accountable for the decision-making, or who takes ownership over a decision or decisions. And that's what's key, is who takes ownership. Many of us have traditionally thought about this as, in bad times, whose head will roll for this decision. However, more important, and what I believe to be more important, is instead of dwelling on the negatives or the things that were failures as they were, why don't we dwell on, and why don't we focus on things like, whose brilliant idea was this? Because from a governance perspective, making comments about whose brilliant idea was this when something succeeds transfers ownership from a board of directors, or from those that are ultimately responsible for the decision makers, to the individual that either A, implemented the course of action, or B, recommended the course of action to be followed, right? So remember, it's about achieving outcomes and desired outcomes, which is what governance is all about. Accountability can be defined as somebody's willingness or ability to take ownership or responsibility over one's actions, right? A governance body in its oversight capacity is accountable or responsible for the entire organization. That's the breadth of its responsibility. Responsibilities to or of stakeholders is about adding value through transparency and reporting, and that's absolutely key, right? Your stakeholders are your investors in your organization, whether it's a board of directors, whether it's the First Nation community itself. They are looking for transparency and reporting. So whether that is a reporting on outcomes, or in a strategic performance against a strategic plan, or whether that is reporting the value of a unit per share, all your stakeholders are looking for is transparency in your reporting and accountability in your reporting. Internal stakeholders are staff and management and other members of the governance body. External stakeholders could be things like shareholders, they could be external investors, they can be your banks, they could be things of that nature. Anybody that goes outside and has a vested interest in the health and well-being of your organization can be what's considered to be an external stakeholder. Key to ensuring that you're reporting and you're responsible to your stakeholders is communication. The implementation of operational and strategic plans, communication throughout this group at all levels must be appropriate for the situation and for the individuals or groups of individuals within that group. So in other words, know your audience. When you're communicating out to your governance body and you're communicating out to your stakeholders, know your audience. Use language and use communication tools that are appropriate for your audience. Also internally, the communication style internally is a reflection of leadership, just no differently than policy is as well. So it's incumbent upon the leaders in your organization to also know who they're speaking with and know their audience. It's also important to know that when you're communicating through email, that if you have a policy, whether it's written or unwritten, that you do not read between the lines, that is communicated, right? It's a simple thought, but when you're sending written communication, right, you should advise people not to read between the lines. In other words, what I'm putting on an email or what I'm putting in paper is what I mean. There's nothing hidden in my message. Your response, so as a leader, as a governance body, as management, you're responsible to communicate performance and achievement of goals and your accomplishments with conviction, with honesty, and with transparency. These are three major criteria or value set within it that builds accountability. A good reflection of a good communicator that communicates with transparency is when they're delivering bad news. So as an example, you can all think about bedside manner when it comes to doctors, for example, that are delivering bad news about a loved one, right? I have one in the family. Their message delivery is very stoic. It's very impersonal. It's very to the point. However, a good communicator will build one, including in bad news situations, such as not achieving targets, meeting objectives, missing budgets, or not being able to close deals or business deals. They will communicate these matters in just a critical, if not a more critical manner than they would communicate successful news. And the reason being is the ability of a leader to have difficult conversations and have difficult communications will basically single you out from the crowd and will identify you as the leader and as sought after leader. So don't be afraid to have difficult conversations. They will, in my experience at least, build you up to be a better leader, especially a leader of people and a leader of resources in the environment, if you can challenge yourself and you can manage to have difficult conversations in the environment. So your stakeholders, vice versa, your stakeholders are responsible to you for honest communication, honest feedback, and to work in collaboration with you and to not be an obstacle to progress and innovation. So if they're investing and they're vested in you, they're vested in you. They're not just investors, but they're business partners who have a vested interest in your success. So I just wanted to make a point of note that contrary to other conversations and descriptions of governance, nowhere in today's conversation that we're having are there words being used such as power or control. These are what I consider to be mental constructs or fabrications made by dominant society. They create unnecessary illusions of who controls or who has power. In a governance framework, words like authority, control, and or power also cast doubt on those that are responsible and have responsibility levels. In other words, what I'm trying to say is those people that truly have control don't need to remind others that they have it. And those people that truly have power or the ability to influence other people don't have to remind others that they have it. They're just simply implicitly there. So again, when we talk, before we leave this slide, I also wanted to tell you that in talking about the key dimensions of governance, I'm reminded of a quote from Spider-Man 1. And I think you're all pretty familiar with this, where Uncle Ben is dying on the street after being shot, where he communicates to Peter Parker before he dons the Spider-Man costume for the first time, that it comes with great power comes great responsibility. And that's incumbent upon governance just as much as it is about becoming a superhero. That you have to wield your authority as a governance officer with a great deal of level of responsibility because you have the ability to affect outcomes. So next, we're going to talk about the 5 basic guiding principles of governance. So this is where economic governance in an ECDEV environment differs from governance in a true governance or in a leadership environment, like you might see in government bodies, governments, municipal, provincial, federal. In federal, provincial, municipal governments, and First Nation governments, there's 10 guiding principles or 10 core functions of leadership. In an ECDEV environment, we've narrowed it down to 5. These 5 are accountability, leadership, integrity, stewardship, and transparency. So accountability is an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility for one's actions. We've talked about this a little bit, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. We talked about leadership. Leaders are often thought of to be people who are able to align collective direction, execute on plans, both operational and strategic, and who can continually renew an organization, do so through respect and understanding. So again, this is a non-traditional definition of leadership or non-traditional conversation about leadership. Integrity and ethics is important because, especially in business, the more closely you align the more closely you align with ethics, the more closely you align with accountability. Integrity can be thought of as someone that is honest with themselves and who has a strong moral compass. They do what is right based on the situation. Oftentimes, as people act with integrity, they generally act in an ethical, meaningful, and impactful way. Stewardship is something completely different. Stewardship is about managing or supervising something and is a reflection of wisdom or gained experience. Alternatively, it can be thought of as a careful, methodical, and responsible management of assets, human or not. This forms a larger part of the oversight function of governance body. And if you are a steward of assets, such as a CFO, similar to, they are responsible for managing the assets of an organization, ensuring they are used as intended, and that the asset base is renewed when necessary and is constantly ready for deployment and use. So in other words, if you're a steward of assets, human or otherwise, you need to be ensured that those assets are always ready to go, that those assets can be deployed at a moment's notice. In other words, they have the training, they have the skill set and the ability to do the work that they need to do. So in other words, as a leader, you're providing them with the resources they need to be able to do the job, along with the skill sets and the tools that are necessary for them to do it. Finally, transparency is, in a business context, refers to being open and honest in your actions and communication. Honesty always comes from within, and it's not to be confused with the truth. So now, from a certain perspective, the reason we say this is truth is law or fact, where honesty is simply telling something that happens to be real. Hence the old saying, you can be transparent without being completely honest, and you can also be honest without being transparent. So in other words, you could tell the truth and hide your true motives. That's what it's getting through. So in other words, if your true motive is to develop and deliver profits for your board of directors and for your shareholders, you can be honest about that, or you can be truthful about that, but you don't necessarily have to be honest about how you're going to go ahead and deliver on all that profit. Not to suggest that you're being shady. In other words, you don't have to completely outline your strategic plan and all your planning that would be necessary to deliver profits to your shareholders. Sustainability and prosperity can be thought of as moving along a continuum, or a progression of values, elements, or events that move and vary together in a linear way. And that's really what a definition of a continuum is. It starts really on the far left and moves to the right as you follow the arrows. It starts with policies, procedures, and risk management. These establish your structure and what is needed to manage for results and outcomes. Policies, procedures, and risk management set the rules and the steps that are needed to ensure the organization meets its production targets and budgets, and is a set of values in place which can be communicated to your employees. The procedures are the steps one must go through to effect a result, deliver your product to market, or even record a transaction. This can be thought of as the codification that is needed to ensure sustainability, knowledge sharing, and that succession planning is embedded in your organization. Risk management is an impactful part of decision-making process. It spells out the way in which an organization will assess a course of events or a risk that might be associated with a transaction or transactions. This involves understanding and assessing the impact of risk and then managing through the accepted risk and ensuring the impacts are what you set them out to be. For example, if an organization is operating a loss, how long are the losses going to last? Why are they happening? And are these something that can be improved and managed to a positive outcome in the future? So that's really what risk management is about. It's about due diligence. The next we're going to look at is the sustainability and prosperity. We're going to look at the wheel of the benefits of policy. So we're not going to start in any one area, but policy and procedure will build the right amount of engagement internally and externally, and will set the stage for performing financially and can lead to growth and expansion. So growth and expansion leads to financial sustainability. For example, employee certainty and engagement, right, will add value, right? They'll add what's acceptable contact. It'll add value through acceptable conduct in the environment. And because employees are engaged, and they're engaged according to policy and through a consistent set of policies, management will have a better ability to drive performance with their staff. Financial transactions, including checks and payments, will be authenticated properly and will be executed on through the system in a way that is acceptable and transparent. So then next one, we look to policy also leads to stability through consistency and expectation setting. You know beforehand what you're getting into and what you might be up against, which is why policy and following policy leads to stakeholder certainty. It leads to board certainty. In other words, boards can trust outcomes because if you're following policy, they can follow the policy. It leads to financial performance, providing all your policies are sound. Financial performance, as we said, leads to sustainability, growth, and expansion. So this is really the wheel of the benefits of policy that we could talk about later if we need to. So better partnerships and stronger relationships also allow you, so we're at this point here now, allow you to become more responsive to changes in the market. They will act as your barometer for change and then help with change management. Partnerships can take the form of a joint venture, service agreements with municipalities and other jurisdictions, and partnerships with other First Nations, for example. Better partnerships and building stronger relationships is about adding value and ensuring your organization is properly networked so it can achieve results and be placed in front of opportunities at the right time in the right way to become a trusted resource and service provider. So examples of partnerships and building strong relationships that have been recently made the news Indigenous organizations in the LNA, for example, have signed agreements with BHP Minerals to provide jobs and build their economy this way. Since sanctioning its Jansen Potash project in Saskatchewan, BHP has also awarded a total of $470 million in contracts to Indigenous businesses in that province. And for example, as we all heard about the news from 2 or 3 years ago now, Clearwater Seafoods is 50% owned by a coalition of Mi'kmaq First Nation in the Maritimes region of Canada. So these are all things that can be achieved by good, strong governance. So there's some socioeconomic benefits of that, accessing capital, improving your access to capital, and these can be thought of to be the ability to finance larger projects and build increasing levels of capacity to manage those projects. This increases your ability to attract more opportunity in the future to expand your operation. Expanding a nation or economic development's own sources of revenue is important, as this is the flexibility a nation or an economic development organization needs to chart the course to increasing independence from its membership from Canada, and it also helps to bring about an immense amount of benefit to your organization. Having access to capital allows you to manage better outcomes when it comes to controlling access to land and resources. Access to capital, whether from a bank or the capital which you own or your retained earnings, will provide increased opportunities for expanding your workforce and your ability to conduct and carry out business. And access to capital increases wealth and provides more positive impacts on families and community. Means being wealthier and being financially nimble increases your own personal satisfaction as well. And it also improved access to capital markets and capital in general also increases mental well-being, and also increases the community's overall mental health as well. So we're now going to talk about trusts. So economic development in the Indigenous space can be extremely complex, as I'm sure you're all aware. This complexity can lead to potentially benefits from economic development not being being realized to their fullest. Reasons for this complexity could be a lack of capacity, and what we mean by that, professional expertise, a lack of opportunities and partnerships, interference from within and without, and I'm sure all of you can think about can have an idea about what it is we're talking about when we're talking about interference from within and without. A lack of business planning and opportunity. Sometimes you don't have an opportunity to take advantage and fully plan it out, or access to appropriate resources for structure. So trusts are one way to reduce or even eliminate complexity and can take many forms. We're going to talk about these, but some of the forms that they can take are bare trusts, their investment trusts, corporate trusts, or trust funds themselves. So, for example, a corporate trust would be something where a business is organized under a corporate trust to hold its retained earnings and to pay its dividends forward to its beneficiaries. Investment trusts, I'm sure all of you are starting to become familiar with things like impact benefit settlements that are now starting to happen across our treaty lands as far as agricultural benefits are concerned. Bare trusts are generally thought of to be holding companies. It's a technical term for holding companies or companies that are built and created to hold assets. So these are just 4 examples of different trusts that can be used in an economic development environment. Corporate trusts, there's basically four different types of benefits that can happen, or things that you need to know about trusts. Trusts set out the rules and guidelines on how and when money can be spent, while a trust is holding assets on behalf of its beneficiary. So a trust agreement is what we're talking about. It sets out the rules and guidelines on how and when money can be spent, while you can create a trust to hold all your assets. This is a governance in action. Decisions on the use of funds are determined by trust agreements themselves, which are then codified and cannot be breached. They're executed and based on policy and agreements by the trustees. So you have governance itself, everything is separated, and everybody has its own set of responsibilities. A board of trustees are usually established to administer and provide oversight to the trust. They are charged with the enforcement of the terms and conditions of the trust agreement, including the distribution of its wealth, the oversight of the management resources for the trust assets, including any of its corporations it may own. Assets that are potentially held by a trust can be cash or money, or other assets such as land or corporations themselves. In the case of corporate trusts, they can hold the shares of a general partner, or the trust or they can hold these assets for the beneficiaries of the trust or the member First Nations that are members to the trust. So for example, there's different structures and everything else, but it's key to remember that when you're setting up corporate trusts, that for the most part, if a trust declares dividends or declares or makes its declaration to return its benefits to its beneficiaries or its members on or before the end of the tax year every year, generally speaking, a trust can be considered tax-free, especially if that trust is resident off reserve, for example, or outside of the traditional home community. As long as the declaration is made payable to the members on or before the tax year, depending on your province, obviously, and your tax laws within your province, and your trust laws within your province, generally speaking, at least from a federal perspective, there's potential that those funds can be distributed tax-free. However, it's key to note that those funds are not declared prior to their tax year. There's potential that those funds could become taxable. So in other words, when you're setting these things up, you're talking about these things, make sure you engage a tax professional in structuring these things appropriately. Don't take the word of a consultant. So the next thing that we want to take a look at specifically is Canada is specifically starting to use trust agreements to start settling land claims, specific claims, and other impact benefits. It's important that we all understand that these trusts are signed on with the members of a nation for their use and everything else, but they contribute to the community's growth. A lot of these communities are also setting aside a portion of these trust settlements for economic development purposes. Also, a lot of these trust agreements are being set up so they benefit the members of a community in perpetuity. So here we're going to look at a potential corporate structure that can be set up that we worked with along with our tax practitioners with a local First Nation here in Manitoba, where we basically set up an org chart for their corporate trusts. So in here, you can see the way that it's organized. You have a joint venture with an outside individual that's set up, that's held by these companies. So in this particular case, the org chart, the solid lines represent direct reporting relationships, not just for information flow, but reporting flow as well. So you see there's several different companies that have a direct reporting relationship into the investment trust. You also see the general partnership and the limited partnership and their boards of directors reporting into the investment trust. Here, what you do see is the reason that we like this trust format and why we feel this trust format is to be effective is the investment trust, along with its board of directors, has an information sharing relationship with the chief and council of the community. In other words, the chief and council of the community do not control the operations of the ECDEV corporations. The board of directors actually do. So chief and council simply have an information sharing relationship with the board. So it's the board of directors that determine the course of action that the investment trust actually takes. And then the investment trust is incumbent to report to the membership or the beneficial owners of the investment trust on its performance. So key here is when we're talking about interference from within and without. In this particular case, we're talking about mitigating the potential for influence from the governing body of the community to manage the economic development operations of a First Nation. Now, we say this because this is what worked for our client, and this is what our client wanted to see in action. It may not work for everybody. It's just a simple one that we adopted at the request of that we implemented at the request of the chief and council. So we have some benefits of trust arrangements. Trust arrangements can act as a firewall between chief and council, as we talked about, economic development operations and membership. The membership of the trust to allow for its tax-free status. The membership of any First Nation community is the beneficiary of the trust. A trust are rules-based and set out, and the rules are set out in agreements that require signature from the settlor, and the settler. So both parties need to agree. More often than not, trust arrangements follow investment rules provided to third-party investment managers to grow the wealth. So in other words, you have third parties that are contracted and paid to act in the best interest of the trust and of the members of the trust and the beneficial owners of that trust. However, there's also cons. Trust agreements and trusts themselves are rigid and inflexible. The majority of the funds can only be used as prescribed by the trust agreement. In other words, you have to consistently consult the trust agreement for their use. The trusts are established through Canadian law. They must be settled with a piece of property that has economic value. So What we mean by that is you must turn over something like $100 bill to settle the trust. Tax law in Canada can apply to an Indigenous trust, even if that trust is on treaty land. So it's key that we understand that. Now, I understand that not all of you are in treaty land, but this is the best example of what we're talking about, because this is starting to become predominant right now in Treaty 4 territory and Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton, for example, where there's a great many impact benefit settlement trusts that are being created and negotiated with Canada right now. Trusts do not have to be reported on through consolidated financial statements. So therefore, the community that are the beneficial owners of that trust may not really come to know its true wealth. And finally, principal amounts should not be leveraged in any way by the local government. Now, that is generally embedded within trust agreements themselves. And what we mean by that when we say that is oftentimes there's language in trust agreements that are settled by Canada or provincial governments that indicate that the principal value of the trust agreement cannot be used to settle debt that's been entered into by the government. That's the end of my presentation at this point in time. I think with the few minutes we have remaining, I'm going to turn it over for questions and answers. Sorry, I stumbled over a couple parts. I was a little bit nervous during today's presentation, especially after I found out it was being recorded, but I think together we did well. So I'm going to turn it over to the floor for questions at this point, if there are any.
You did good, Glenn. It was
Well,
great.
thanks, Michelle. I appreciate
It was
it.
very thorough, especially in the short amount of time that we were allotted. You covered a lot of ground, gave good insight to today's topic. We have a question here in the chat box from Ken. Ken always brings the good questions.
Perfect.
Preventing unscrupulous activity. Difficult words. Activity is difficult to prevent in an environment where the principles of the organization engage in deceit, deception, dishonesty with the various stakeholders. It's a tough question.
It is a tough question. How do you mitigate? How do you mitigate that? You're right, Ken. It is extremely difficult to prevent unscrupulous activity in an environment where principles where they simply seek to defraud, I think is the way, or defraud anybody. I've worked in these environments before. The best way to do it is stick to your ethics, stick to your integrity, understand your core values. Don't let anybody bend you from your core values. Like I said at the outset, I've been practicing now for 30 years. I've had to quit jobs because my ethical principles and I would have violated the code of ethics that I've sworn to uphold and my code of conduct as a professional working in Canada, because some of the deals, especially in public sector environment, are too shady and are too unscrupulous for me to turn around and be a part of. And simply knowing that they've been in the environment, I've had to resign myself from some pretty lucrative engagements. But the best way to do it is to maintain your ethics, stick to your integrity, and stick to your core values. Your core values or your North Star, in my experience, will always get you home and will always deliver you to the place where you need to go.
So important.
Is that fair, Ken?
Ken, thoughts?
Yeah, I guess my point was not only the big items, but the small items. For example, you're hiring somebody, you're bringing somebody on, you're not really honest with that. If you're not really honest with that potential employee about what he's actually going to be doing or what she's going to be doing, and the salary involved, when you know that the salary really should be much higher than what you're actually offering them. So it's little deceits and little betrayals that you don't allow to get called out. So in organizations where hey, you lied to me when you brought me on, you told me my position was this, and when I get into the job, it's actually something less than that, and my salary and benefits are something less. So the little, it's not the big ones, it's the little ones that accumulate and set yourself up for the big ones. Anyway, that's sorry. I apologize for going off on a track, but it's a little things, and people and employees or participants, stakeholders are afraid to call it out because that you're making an issue. So anyway, it was just a point on honesty that It's, there's a lot of dishonesty going on in small ways, not only big ways.
Yeah, no, Ken, you're absolutely right. If I could, Michelle, before we go on to the next, I just wanted to add some color around that if I could. It's becoming increasingly incumbent upon, I'm just going to say it this way, individuals in my generation that are still in the workforce. As some of you could tell maybe through the camera, I have some gray hair in my beard. It's becoming incumbent upon us as individuals to understand the millennial and the post-millennial work environment and the fact that they crave honesty, they crave transparency, and they crave, I don't want to say instant gratification, but they crave gratification, and acknowledgement of a job well done, differently than someone in my generation of the workforce might. So to your comment, Ken, it's becoming increasingly incumbent upon those people that are working in multi-generational work environments from a good, strong governance point of view to understand all the different demographics that are in a workforce that you're managing or that you're leading, and be able to know your audience, as it were, and to be able to have those conversations with everybody and to be able to have them in an open and transparent manner. You're right. It's absolutely important, even along the little things.
Thank you. That's
Yep.
a great presentation, very comprehensive.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks. We have time for one question. If anyone wants to jump in or put something in the chat box, this is your time. Bring the question. And I know Glenn is going to put up, there it is, contact information.
There it is.
There it is.
If I could, Michelle, feel free to email me with any of your questions. Just because you may not have put them up in the chat box today or we got around to them today does not mean that they're not important and they're not worth asking. Please fire them off. I'm happy to engage you through email. I'm also happy to engage you through a telephone call. I'm also happy to engage you through text. The email is provided here, or the phone number that's provided here is my cell number. Talk, text, message, whatever works.
So there you go. So I just want to, we have a thank you from Caitlin for the insightful presentation. Caitlin, who is in the nice -2 weather. Did I see that?
I know, eh? I'm jealous. I'm jealous.
No. But I think one thing that really, even with Ken's question is, you know, with great responsibility, I love that Spider-Man, you know, quote there. With great responsibility really is great integrity needs to be coupled with that. And so I thank you for mentioning that, you know, as we look at governance, we look at leadership, integrity is a big one, transparency. I mean, you covered a lot of good grounds and got us thinking about things, but I just want to, as our closing comment, because you mentioned this, mid workshop, mid presentation, you're like, you said, if there's any takeaway, this is it. Managers are hired to manage while boards are hired for the oversight. So that distinction, I think, is really important to acknowledge and bring to the table as well. Knowing the role and the responsibility in that sacred role, right? So great presentation. Thank you all for joining. I hope you have a good rest of the Tuesday. Glenn, thank you so much. We lift our hands to you for the knowledge that you brought this afternoon. Take care, everybody. We'll see you again.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you for asking me to be here.